In Magic the Gathering, there are lots of cards that let you return a card of a particular type from your graveyard to your hand, and lots of them are great cards that let you get back permanents or creatures, and they get a lot of attention. However, the most powerful version of this recursive effect is less often used. These don't put any restriction on what you can get back at all. It can be a permanent, a non-permanent, a card of any mana value, and so on. When that's the case, these effects are often called regrowths, in reference to a card from Alpha that has the effect, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Regrowth established that the effect was part of the green color pie too, and it has been, ever since then. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the same effect. It had to be able to return any card from your graveyard to your hand. Unsurprisingly, cards with these effects have performed incredibly well. While there are only 26 of them, 20 of them have at least one top 8 at a major Magic event. And the top 3 cards on this list have incredibly high scores. So let's take a look at the 10 regrowths that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Greenwarden of Murasa. For 4 generic and 2 green, it's a 5/4, and when it enters and dies, it does the regrowth thing, but only if you choose to exile the Greenwarden when it dies. Obviously, they didn't want you to be able to loop this super powerful recursive creature that has recursive effects, and yeah, it's pretty great to get 2 cards back from your graveyard with 1 card, especially when you're only overpaying by 1 or 2 mana for its 5/4 body too, which is enough size for it to at least be a threat in combat, and your opponent really can't interact with the Greenwarden normally and hope to come out ahead since it has those 2 regrowths stapled to it. The Greenwarden was played in Standard, where it sometimes appeared as a one-of in graveyard-focused Delirium decks, which had no problem finding a way to get a card out of both of the Greenwarden's triggers. However, it doesn't have any top 8 since 2017, and the number 11 card on this list, Auroral Procession, has 6 points and is currently active, so the Greenwarden won't be on this list for very much longer. At number 9, it's Nyx Weaver. For 1 generic, a black, and a green, it's a 2/3 enchantment creature with reach, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you mill 2 cards. You can also pay 1 generic, a black, and a green, and exile the Weaver to do the regrowth thing. The downside about regrowth effects is that you don't always have something in your graveyard worth getting, but Nyx Weaver helps you out with its mill trigger, and once you have something in there that you want more than a 2/3 with reach, you can give it up and grab that card. And in the meantime, the Weaver also helps you in a big way with your other graveyard synergy. While in Standard, Nyx Weaver was played in Abzan and Sultai mid-range decks with hefty graveyard sub-themes, however it hasn't put up any top 8 since 2015. At number 8, it's Once and Future. For 3 generic and a green, it's an instant that returns target card from your graveyard to your hand, and it allows you to put up to 1 other target card from your graveyard on top of your library, and you exile Once and Future. It gets powered up if you spend at least 3 green mana to cast it, because when that's the case, you put both of those cards into your hand, giving you a double regrowth. It was a sideboard card in adventure decks while it was in Standard, one that was often brought in against opponents who were counter magic or disruption heavy, as it could make up for your opponent countering stuff early, or making you discard it. The deck was pretty reliant on powerful adventure payoffs like Lucky Clover and Edgewall Innkeeper, and making sure you had 1 in play to get tons of value was important. Plus, just returning anything with an adventure, like Bone Crusher Giant, often felt like you were getting 2 cards back anyway, since you could use the adventure and the creature. So if you got to get back 2 cards when you had adventure nonsense going on, it usually felt like you were getting at least a 4 for 1. However, Once and Future doesn't have any top 8 since 2020. At number 7, it's Codex Shredder. For 1 mana, it's an artifact, and you can tap it to have target player put the top card of their library into their graveyard. You can also pay 5 mana, tap, and sacrifice the Shredder to get a card back from your graveyard. While it was originally printed in 2012, it took a few years for Codex Shredder to actually find a home, and it did it in one of the most surprising competitive Magic decks of all time, Lantern Control. The deck featured an assortment of cards like the Shredder that no one had ever thought were very good, and all of them had one thing in common. They give you information about the top of your opponent's library, or they let you mill your opponent's library one card at a time. For example, the deck's eponymous Lantern was Lantern of Insight, and alongside the Shredder you could use something like Ghoul Caller's Bell. The whole game plan was to lock the opponent out of the game by keeping them from ever drawing something that was actually useful. This, combined with prison effects like Ensnaring Bridge, could allow you to slowly rip apart your opponent's deck while making sure they never took another meaningful game action. In that deck, the Shredder's recursive ability also came in handy since you often milled yourself a lot too, and it could be used to grab something important that you may have milled, like your Ensnaring Bridge or your Girapur Aether Grid, one of the deck's non-mill win conditions. The deck burst onto the scene in Modern in 2015, and it's still around today. It's changed some, but many versions of the deck still use Codex Shredder, and it's still active in the format, although it's not exactly a deck that's putting up lots of absurd finishes or anything, partly because it's an incredibly complex and slow deck to play, and not everyone wants to sign up for that. Codex Shredder is likely to continue to put up top 8s here and there in Modern, and if you want a deeper dive on Lantern control decks, I do have an entire video about that. At number 6, it's Colossal Skyturtle. For 4 generic, 2 green, and a blue, it's a 6/5 with flying and ward 2, and it has 2 channel abilities, which means you can pay a cost and discard a card for an effect. You can pay 2 generic and a green for a regrowth, or 1 generic and a blue to bounce target creature. The Skyturtle is a very flexible card since it can have one of those meaningful spell-like effects when you need it to, and your opponent also can't counter them most of the time because it's not casting a spell, but you can also just put it into play as a huge, hard-to-kill threat. While it was in Standard, it was played in Temur control decks, but it's done the most work in Modern, where it's played in Living In decks. These decks are all about discarding creatures for value in the early game, like with the Skyturtle's channel, and then cascading into Living In to destroy all the creatures on the battlefield and reanimate everything in graveyards. This is consistently accomplished by running 3 mana cards with Cascade, and running no card in the deck that has a mana value of 2 or less, so you always hit the 0 mana value Living In when you Cascade. The Skyturtle's ability to get a card back from the graveyard can be pretty useful, since if someone thought seizes you and throws away your Cascade card, you can draw the turtle later and get it back. And in general, you can channel the turtle early and then reanimate it later, which is pretty nasty, especially because it's usually joined by all manner of other large cycling creatures. While Cascade decks have taken a hit in Modern from the banning of Violent Outburst, the ban didn't extinguish this deck entirely, and the turtle is continuing to put up top 8s in the format. And the number 5 regrowth effect is, well, Regrowth. For 1 generic and a green, it's a sorcery that returns target card from your graveyard to your hand. It's simple, but it's actually a very good recursive effect because it's so cheap and flexible. It was even better during the earliest days of competitive Magic, as evidenced by the fact that it got restricted in 1994, ahead of the game's very first major competitive event, the 1994 World Championship. The main reason it was restricted is because it can so easily undermine the rest of the restricted list by letting you regrowth your Time Walk or Ancestral Recall, which Wizards had gone to great lengths to make sure people couldn't cast a bunch of times in one game. Even though it was restricted, people still played it at the first World Championship, the one copy that was allowed, and in fact the top 4 decks at the event were all using Regrowth. After that it went quiet for a while, in part because it was later banned and extended and then in Legacy, and it remained restricted in Vintage all the way until 2013. After getting unbanned in Legacy, though, it started seeing play in graveyard-oriented decks such as Survival of the Fittest and Life from the Loam, where a big part of what makes it so good is precisely why they restricted it in the format for so long. It helps you get multiple uses out of the many absurd restricted cards in the format. It also makes combo decks more resistant to disruption. You can use Regrowth to make sure your Oath of Druids can stick on the battlefield, and in some decks you can use it to bring back another win condition. However, Regrowth doesn't have any top 8 since 2021, and in the long run, it's going to start slipping down this list. At number 4, it's Tamiyo, Collector of Tales. For 2 generic, a green, and a blue, it's a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, and she makes the list because of her -3, which does the Regrowth thing. She also makes it so spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to discard or sacrifice permanents, and she has a +1 that has you choose a non-land card name, and you reveal the top 4 cards of your library and put all cards with the chosen name from among them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. So she's good at hating on a couple of disruptive effects that are usually found in black, and her +1 can draw you cards while loading the graveyard for value, and she can even reap that value with her own -3. She's not really a planeswalker who can directly impact the board, but she can certainly become an impressive value engine with just a little help. She was the most heavily played in Standard, where she appeared in lots of decks with the Simic colors in them. Pretty much all the non-aggressive decks in the format, like Control and Combo decks, were using it, especially if they had a graveyard theme or sub-theme, since decks that can take advantage of all the cards she mills can get even more value out of her. So she saw play in decks with those elements that were also reliant on making sure they kept a certain card in play, like Wilderness Reclamation and Kethis combo decks, but her most frequent home was Sultai Control. In Pioneer, she's appeared in Delirium and Blue-White Control decks, and she's even been featured on occasion in Modern and Legacy. However, so far in 2025, Tamiyo doesn't have any top 8s. I just told you about Tamiyo, Collector of Tales, so let me tell you about something I'm collecting. Subscribers. I'm closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and I'd love to reach that milestone by the end of the year, and I'd really appreciate your help in getting me to that milestone. At number 3, it's Den Protector. For 1 generic and a green, it's a 2/1, and creatures with power less than Den Protector's power can't block it. It also has a morph variant called Megamorph, which means you can play it face down for 3 generic mana as a 2/2, and then you can pay the Megamorph cost at any time to turn it face up, and the mega part here is that it gets a +1/+1 counter when you do it. In this case, the Megamorph cost is 1 generic and a green, and it turns it face up as a 3/2, and you also get a Regrowth, because when it turns face up, you return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Den Protector gives you some pretty amazing value. You can run it out on turn 2 if you really have to, but you can also spend 5 total mana for a hard-to-block 3/2 that gets a card back, and that's not a bad deal. It was just very easy to get 2-for-1s with Den Protector, and that made her a heavily played card during her time in Standard. She was especially nasty when combined with Death Mist Raptor. This was a creature that returned to the battlefield from the graveyard anytime you turned a creature face up. That means you could turn her face up, get something back from your graveyard, and then get your Raptor on the battlefield. And the Raptor has Death Touch, and it's pretty sizable, so it's definitely not a creature your opponent can ignore. Yeah, that's the engine that powered a lot of decks in Standard, especially a deck called Green-White Megamorph. She was heavily played in the format overall, showing up in just about all the green decks, and that allowed her to gain over 100 points just in Standard, but she hasn't ever managed to find success in any other formats. Even having some new payoffs for turning creatures face up in Duskmourn hasn't been enough to lead to her seeing play in Pioneer or anywhere else, but her massive score in Standard is more than enough for her to remain on this list for the foreseeable future. At number 2, it's Bala Ged Recovery. For 2 generic and a green, it's an uncommon sorcery that can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. That's not the most exciting card. I mean, Regrowth does the same thing for 1 less mana. But there is one big upside Recovery has that Regrowth doesn't. It's a modal double-face card, and on its other side, it's a land called Bala Ged Sanctuary, which enters tapped and can tap for green mana. Modal double-face cards can be played as either side, and that's great because it makes this card good whether you're flooding out or mana screwed, and being able to get your best card back from the graveyard definitely feels nice in the later stages of the game. This makes the cost of running this incredibly low, and has resulted in it being very heavily played ever since being printed in 2020. While in Standard it was featured in all manner of green decks, in Pioneer it's regularly appeared in Lotus Field decks since 2020, and in that deck it isn't just a generically good card, it's actually a key part of the deck. These decks look to win the game by producing absurd mana with Lotus Field, which is accomplished by untapping it multiple times a turn. Then Omniscience eventually comes into play, at which point you can use Bala Ged Recovery to get whatever you need back from the graveyard for no mana, and then cast that thing for free too. For example, some versions of the deck use Chandra, Hope's Beacon, a planeswalker that has a -X ability that can damage your opponent. She also copies your instants and sorceries. This means that if you have some mix of 3 recoveries in your graveyard and your hand, you can play Chandra, cast Bala Ged Recovery to get 2 recoveries back, and then -X to do 5 to the opponent. Then you cast another recovery from your hand to get back Chandra, and rinse and repeat. Like all modal double-face cards, it also sees play in decks that can take advantage of its very nature as a modal double-face card. This is because, while in your deck, Bala Ged Recovery isn't considered a land, so effects that check for lands don't see it as one. This means it's been used in both Pioneer and Modern landless spy decks. These decks run only modal double-face cards as their lands, and that means when Balustrade Spy enters, or you use Undercity Informer's ability, your entire deck gets milled, and then the deck can win the game in a variety of ways. Ultimately, this combo got banned out of Pioneer. Similarly, it's been played in Modern Goblin Charbelcher decks. The Belcher's activated ability reveals cards until you hit a land, and then does damage to the opponent equal to the number of revealed cards. And in this deck, all the lands in it are modal double face cards, so it will kill your opponent in a single activation. Bala Ged Recovery is still actively putting up top 8s, and in the long run, it may be able to become the number 1 card on the list. For now though, that number 1 card is Eternal Witness. I think when a player hears Regrowth effect, the first card they think of after Regrowth is Eternal Witness. For 1 generic and 2 green, she's a 2/1, and when she enters, you can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Her most frequent home across all formats has been combo decks that are reliant on a few specific cards. The Eternal Witness gives these decks a way to get back a combo piece that might have been removed. In Standard, for example, she was played in Astral Slide decks that really needed that enchantment and play to do their thing, and she was also great to blink with the slide when you cycled a card since it would trigger her ability. In Extended, she was played in Alurin and Doran decks, which, as you might imagine, were highly reliant on their eponymous cards. Modern is where the Witness has done the most work, largely in toolbox decks that can tutor up creatures in their library with ease, and as a result, they generally have a 2-card combo around to win the game in an instant. The most infamous deck like this is Birthing Pod, but after the pod was banned in Modern, Collected Company and Court of Calling took its place. The Witness is great because you can search it up at the precise moment when you really need something back from your graveyard. These days, she sees play in Yawgmoth combo decks, which can tutor it up when they need to get back one of those combo pieces. Eternal Witness is still active in Modern right now, but it does feel like Bala Ged Recovery is going to pass it in the long run. So, those are Magic's best regrowth effects. If you like returning any card from your graveyard to your hand, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to catch up on past videos, including hundreds of other MTG Top 10s, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.